India's exports hit a record high of $770 billion in FY23. Is India set to become a major export hub? Let's find out. Welcome to TOI Business Bytes. India has set a target of $2 trillion exports by 2030. How easy or difficult is this going to be? Chatting up with us on this important topic is Madan Sabnavis. He's Chief Economist at Bank of Baroda. Welcome to the show, sir. Thank you for being with us. My first question to you is that, India has recorded $770 billion exports in the last financial year. So tell us from a helicopter view, what does it mean for the Indian economy?
See, for the Indian economy, I think this is very good news because we are a country which typically has a current account deficit under normal conditions. So if I see my overall exports of goods and services are increasing and have reached the levels of over $700 billion, and probably this is something which is going to accelerate in future also. I think this is very good news from the point of view of balance of payments management, because we have had to depend a lot in terms of our capital account, and we keep talking of FDI, FPIs to support the balance of payments. But today, if I see that my current account deficit is coming under control, it's coming down on account of higher growth in exports of goods and services, that I think it bodes well for the Indian economy. This said, however, we need to qualify that when we are talking of exports of goods and services, we've seen a differential performance of goods from services. So while services is something which has definitely been increasing at a very steady rate, it's not always been so for goods. And that is where I think there could be concerns going ahead.
What about breakdown within exports? Are we breaking new grounds? Because there are reports that actually India's electronic exports have surpassed garment exports. So are there new areas in which we are doing well?
No, actually, if we look at our overall composition of exports, it tends to be very, very traditional-like. When I say traditional-like, it's normally the traditional goods which have been dominating, and the non-traditional goods, which are talking of things like electronics or engineering, are things which are increasing, but right. Probably not, they can be increasing at a much faster rate. Now, specifically to address the question which you have spoken about electronics and garments, now what we have seen in the current financial year is that the PLI has been very much in operation. So PLI is something which has definitely given a boost to the electronic sector, especially if we talk of mobile handsets. And that is where I think there is a difference which has been made. But this said, again, I think it's necessary to qualify that while our exports have definitely increased, I think it's been over 50% for electronics, but our imports of electronics have also been very high, because typically in this sector, what happens is we're importing the components, we're assembling it, and then we're selling it. A large part of that is sold in domestic markets, but there's, of course, exports also which are involved, and that is what is getting reflected out here. Now, to the other part which you mentioned about garments, I think there have been problems in terms of the entire textile sector, both in terms of higher costs of raw material, that is cotton, power costs, intense competition which is coming from other countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, Pakistan also to a certain extent. And the fact that the global economy has slowed down has meant that overall demand has really not kept pace with the supply.
What is it that India is actually getting right in terms of doing relatively well on the exports front? Are we getting our policies right? Are the global demand patterns changing? Is it the PLI scheme that is helping us? How is it the picture emerging?
In my view, what I have seen is that Indian exports of goods seem to be related a lot to what happens to the global economy. In the years when the global economy is doing very well, we've seen that our exports have also been growing. Right. And at certain points of time, we have seen that when the rupee depreciates, there is a bit of competitive edge which is provided to our exports. However, in 22-23, we have seen that the global economy has slowed down. Second, while the rupee depreciated by around 7 to 8% on an annual basis, we've seen virtually all currencies depreciate. Right. And I think the way in which the rupee has depreciated, we have been somewhere at the median level. Being at the median level means you're at a halfway level, which means currencies which depreciated more than the Indian rupee had definitely an advantage when it comes to the export markets. Right. So therefore, to my mind, when we're looking at Indian exports, I think we need to see what is happening to the global economy. That is the thing which is going to drive our exports of goods in particular. The same thing does not hold for services, because services At one point of time, we felt that, say, exports of software is something which will also get linked to the global economy. And if the global economy is slowing down, there'll be a slowdown in terms of growth in our services exports. But that's something which has not materialized this year. And that gives us hope that even in 23-24, when the global economy is going to slow down even further compared to 22-23, there is still hope as far as exports of services are concerned. But in terms of merchandise, I think what the government can do, what the manufacturers can do, is to keep plugging away, try to bring about improvement, try and make sure that the quality of goods improves, try and make sure that they are more competitive in terms of cost, low cost. I think that's the way which we have to keep plugging on. Now, these are main issues. They're not really new, something which we have known for the last couple of decades. I think we have seen certain sectors like what you mentioned, something like electronics, which have definitely shown positive proclivities. We've also seen things like chemicals and engineering doing well in certain points of time. But we haven't really gotten the act together of the entire set of the basket growing at the same rate. And in fact, the interesting part about growth in merchandise exports for this particular financial year is, if I removed refinery products, we actually would have degrown. There's been a negative growth in exports. So it just shows that the global environment is very, very critical as far as the prospects of Indian exports are concerned.
There is this whole debate on whether India should be focusing on manufacturing exports or services exports. So what is the road ahead there?
I think as a nation, we need to concentrate on both of them. And I would say that probably something like exports of goods, that's merchandise, is something where we need to keep plugging on to make sure that we're able to bring about higher rates of growth. Because at the end of the day, I think the overall Indian economy has to grow based on manufacturing.
Right.
Presently, if I look at the Indian economic model, it's more of services which have been driving economic growth. But it needs to be manufacturing. And if I'm going to concentrate a lot on manufacturing, which is where jobs are also being created, the SMEs are involved, I think we need to be looking in terms of our export growth being sustainable. Now, there's certain years in which we've gotten double-digit growth rates. Sometimes we get negative, maybe a low single digit. The focus should be on growing our exports by around 10 to 15% on a sustainable basis for the next 5 to 10 years, if that has to make a real difference. Because I think when the Indian economy starts growing at 7 to 8% on a continuous basis, it'll be the manufacturing sector which will be driving it. Now, when we talk of export of services, I think that is something where we have an inherent advantage and something which has done very well, taken us very well in the last 3 decades or so. And that will continue to plug away, and that will keep contributing to the overall external story. But where the government action is required, I think it has to be in manufacturing. But if we look at services, for example, that is something which happens exogenously. I think the sector is very good, and that's how you're able to generate the kind of revenue, the kind of business which we're seeing.
There's this whole dream that India should actually be exporting at $2 trillion by 2030. So do you see India becoming a major exports hub in the coming years? Do you see this $2 trillion dream being achievable? And what are the policy prescriptions and challenges that we need to address for that?
No, in fact, I think 2 trillion is a good dream to have. If we were only talking in terms of services, I do see an acceleration taking place. But when you're looking at goods based on the last 30 years of history, I think it's not going to happen anytime soon. Because if you say who are the ones who are really contributing to our exports, it's actually the SME segment. They play a very critical part. And that is a segment which I think the government has to focus on in terms of proactive policies when it comes to supply of infrastructure, giving any kind of interest rate subventions, any kind of benefit in terms of credit, trying to make sure they become more professional, the quality of goods improves. I think these are the things which we have to focus on the SME sector if we have to think about getting acceleration in terms of growth in merchandise exports. But it's going to be a very, very slow process. And I would say that since I've been tracking this particular segment, that is the export segment, ever since I started my career in the late 1980s, there has been substantial improvement made. The overall composition of our exports has changed a lot. But I think these have all taken place in piecemeal form. And I think the time has come where I think all the segments, all the sectors will have to be put together, and we make sure that the sectors which hold more promise are the ones which are given the push by the government. PLI is a wonderful scheme, something which would definitely help to accelerate the growth in exports. Because at the end of the day, when we're talking in terms of increasing manufacturing output, it's not just for the domestic economy. This whole concept of Make in India, the whole idea is to also make sure that we're able to become a part of global supply chains. All this means that our export sector will have to grow. So I think the government is doing a lot of things in terms of policy, but finally at the end of the day, it has to be Indian enterprise which has to take it on in a positive way, and they're the ones who should be driving this entire story.
Okay. Are there any particular sectors in which you think the PLI scheme should be brought in so that we can actually shift our focus towards exports in that sector?
No, I think the PLI is fairly comprehensive. We're covering around 14, 15 sectors. But I think what kind of tweaking should be done based on how the PLI works is to actually look at more the SME segment to see whether we can make something tailor-made. It's presently the way in which the PLI is structured. We're talking of a certain amount of investment, certain amount of incremental output that has to come in, where definitely the larger companies are at an advantage. So I think the way in which it's started off, it's going to be more of the larger companies which are going to benefit. But I think gradually we need this to flow down towards the SME segment. So the quantum of investment required should definitely be more tailor-made, probably bring it down. Identify the sectors where they are like auto answering. I think the sectors anyway have been identified quite well by the government, but I think we need to keep it more tailor-made for the SME segment so that they are the ones who are able to benefit and drive this entire initiative of pushing up our exports.